Our next speaker is Dr. Soenke Ziesche, who has extensive experience with the UN in the humanitarian, recovery and sustainable development fields, as well as in data and information management. And Dr. Ziesche's work critically examines the limitations of AI. We've heard a little bit about this today. We've heard that there are limitations as well as opportunities, but particularly in the ways in which data gaps, bias, and model opacity can shape what risks are visible and really what remains overlooked. So we're going to be going a bit deeper on some of the points that were already mentioned. So in this presentation, you will highlight the structural blind spots in AI systems and the governance approaches needed to address them. So please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for the introduction, Lori, and thank you so much for the invitation to Ricardo and Walter. I share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. So my short presentation is about, as Lori already mentioned, what I call blind spots of disaster risk knowledge. Some of the points were already raised in the previous presentations, but I want to go into a little bit more detail. And also, as has been mentioned before, and as we saw, there are tremendous advances and opportunities for AI and disaster risk knowledge and many other fields, as we know and have seen. But again, there may remain some challenges. I want to focus on two of them. One is bias and inequalities from training data, and second, opaque and unexplainable models. And then in the last part of the presentation, I want to briefly talk about governance approaches to mitigate these risks. So about the first issue, biases and inequalities from training data. AI models used in disaster risk knowledge are typically trained on a certain range of data. These are remote sensing data, insurance and governmental data sets, English language scientific literature, and digitized historical disaster records, so everything what is digitally available. But this also kind of creates or reveals a bias, because this is a bias towards highly monitored regions, often from the global north, and also in terms of formal institutions. Actually, we can talk about two types of biases here: a data coverage bias, because it's often unevenly distributed geographically and socially. There are highly monitored regions in the world when it comes to disaster risk knowledge. Then they're often predominantly in the global north, because there's a dense data coverage. And this means also that many regions of the global south are, and also rural areas are, underrepresented. So it's for AI systems much harder to make accurate predictions in these parts of the world, because when there are less data available. Also, there's a knowledge system bias, because often the data are, as mentioned in this list here, from formal institutions and scientific knowledge, but this overlooks local and indigenous knowledge, oral histories which are not digitized, or qualitative indicators. They rarely appear in training data. So this is one area where I see blind spots. I go to the next slide. So this again lists basically those items which are often missing because they are either not digitized and or not machine readable. This would be documents in local and minority languages, often oral histories, ecological indicators, but also there are indigenous forecasting practices which are not easy to quantify, which are rather qualitative. Like if we look at flowering patterns, unusual animal behavior, those things often are not part of AI system training data, hence they don't have an impact on predictions of AI systems. So this would mean that AI models would ignore those signals because the data are just not available, and they would not appear in risk maps, predictions, and this could result in missing out critical vulnerabilities. The consequences, again, would be that AI systems tend to privilege hazards that are instrumentally measurable and digitally recorded, while many locally observed early warning signs and social vulnerabilities may remain invisible to data-driven models, because AI systems it's all about training data, and if these points are not available as training data, then of course AI systems won't take them into account. And then this means that this can marginalize local and indigenous knowledge and shaping disaster risk knowledge in ways that reproduce epistemic inequities and potentially increase vulnerability. This is the one point I would like to highlight, and I know it has been highlighted in the previous presentation before. The next one is linked to what I believe is even a more serious point, because I think the first item is easier to fix, and I will talk about it at the end of the presentation. But the second one is much harder, I believe. So these are opaque and unexplainable models. I start with two quotes from the most important, or from very important researchers in the field. First, a quote from Yudkowsky and Soares: "Modern AI systems are grown rather than crafted." And then Jampolsky this year: "We like to think of AI developers as engineers building a machine, but in reality, we should consider them more like farmers. They water a model with data and fertilize it with computing power, and then they wait to see what grows." So what does it mean? Because before AI, we were basically used to computer systems which are actually built by engineers like a machine, and it was exactly explainable, at least by the developers, how the systems react based on the input. But those quotes, they illustrate that unlike traditional codes, AI systems, they learn patterns from massive data sets, but so without explicit instructions for every decision. And the developers only control the data and the architecture and the training procedures, but what then comes out of it, what then emerges, or as it is term used here, what then grows, is basically unpredictable, and it's opaque. And this is not only related to disaster risk knowledge, but also very much to, among all fields where AI systems are used. But it means that any AI-generated risk assessments or predictions are basically difficult to interpret, and decision makers may not, and scientists may not know why a particular area is flagged as high risk, let's say for disasters, or not, because it cannot be explained why systems came to this particular decision or output. And so this lack of transparency obviously complicates trust, accountability, and ethical deployment. And again, especially when it's combined with the first point I made, when local and indigenous knowledge is not included. So this is a combination of two issues. The outcome of the systems may not be explainable, and at the same time there are data or lacking, like what I indicated before. So again, to highlight, this is a structural feature and not a design flaw. This is how these systems work, and this is basically the reality of large language models. On the next slide, I talk again about the consequences. So this means the internal thought process of modern deep learning systems remain fundamentally a black box, and no human can fully read or predict it. And when outcome cannot be explained, it becomes hard to trust or challenge them. And this creates a problem for accountability and appeals. And in the previous presentations, several times human in the loop has been mentioned. I know this is a very critical feature, but it is basically challenges this concept also, what I'm presenting here, because it's simply impossible by the nature of those systems that a human is in the loop while these systems are making predictions. I mean, the humans receive the outcome, but they cannot explain why the system decided to come up with this outcome. Now, as I said, I wanted to, in the last part, to talk a little bit about the potential governance mitigation approaches. And I think the first one is again about the topic I made related to biases. And this is, there is a solution for this. And I know that this has been considered also. And I know that, for instance, DRR and other organizations are working on it, but I think there's still a gap. But this is about inclusive data governance. So AI system developers should be encouraged to incorporate locally generated data and indigenous knowledge alongside scientific data sets. This may be challenging because those data may have to be digitalized or have to be collected first. They have to maybe have to be translated. But again, this is technically possible. Another point would be participatory model development. This means to involve local communities and practitioners in design, validation, and interpretation of AI models, so that this is not only in the hand of those AI developers, system developers who may not have this background, which is required. And for the biases and representativeness, there could be audits to look and fix them, to promote regular reviews of training data and model outputs to identify geographic, cultural, and knowledge system biases. So I think these are useful and realistic ways to address this issue. And I know some of those activities are ongoing, but I wanted to highlight it, I think, because I think there's still gaps and work to do. When it comes, basically this is what I had already said. So I know several stakeholders emphasize the importance of indigenous and local knowledge in DRR and advocate for the participation, but then it's critical also to link this to AI systems, because it would be critical to ensure that AI systems further reflect diverse and locally grounded knowledge. When it comes to the other issue I raised, explainability, I think this is much harder. There can be some efforts made, like transparency standards could be introduced to encourage documentation of data sources, model assumptions, and limitations behind AI-generated data risk assessments, so that this is standardized and also very transparent which training data have been used. Explainability efforts can be made by favoring simpler or more interpretable models where possible, or provide partial explanation of complex models. Again, but this requires to have then really simpler models, but which may not be as powerful as current LLMs. But so this is kind of a trade-off to make. And independent oversight would be a good approach to support external review and auditing of AI systems used in disaster risk governance. These are some approaches which may be helpful, but overall, full transparency and explainability of current LLMs is still an unresolved problem. And as we have seen, they are quickly getting more complex, meaning that this it will be even hard. The problem basically becomes harder and harder. This issue affects disaster risk management, but also AI worldwide, basically all fields where AI systems are used and applied. So governance, auditing, and interpretability are necessary, but approaches which I introduced on the previous slides, but I believe they're only partial solutions, and the problem is global, ongoing, and systemic, and I think we have to keep this always in mind, that there's simply no solution at this point. And again, systems are getting more complex, which will make that problem even more complicated. This was my presentation. I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. You raised some really important issues, and I do know that when we were developing our own AI policy, we looked at many policies of agencies around the world and countries. Many of them touched on the same issues of transparency, co-creation. The issue is, how do you implement this? How do you ensure this really happens at a country level? We don't have time to go into it now. We only have about 15 minutes left, and I do want to get to a little bit of Q&A if possible.